I've had a few different camera bags, and the one that I keep gravitating towards is the Lowepro 450 AV2. I believe they have launched recently the third version of it. I'm perfectly content with my version 2. Cameras and bodies. The Sony A1. I have it in a small rig cage. It has the same sensor as the Sony A7S III, FX3, FX6 and the FX9. Maybe not FX9. It's an absolute low light beast. Dual native sensor, and it's really clean at 12,800 ISO versus the Sony A7S III AI autofocus. I haven't really noticed a huge difference. Maybe, it makes less mistakes. It also has a dynamic stabilization and auto framing. I don't really use the auto framing. The dynamic stabilization can be really useful. It's not very good when you're changing directions, but if you're moving in a linear way, it's absolutely brilliant. It's not really suitable as a podcasting camera or a long interview camera because it does overheat on you. I use it accordingly. The one other sacrifice, there's no viewfinder. Let me just talk a little bit about the lens, the 20mm 1.8G. It's really sharp across the whole frame. The one thing that really surprised me is bokeh. It has really nice, pleasing bokeh. It also is incredibly well corrected. You don't have to think about distortion with this lens. The Sony A1. The predominant reason why I got the Sony A1 was because I had a client that I had been shooting a lot of photos and videos for underwear. The shooting schedule was absolutely insane. We were shooting 60 to 80 different sets of underwear per day. I had the Sony A7S III for the video part. Then I had the Sony A7R4 for the photo part. When you're changing lenses 80 times per day, you're gonna have some dust, you're gonna have some specks going onto the sensor. So having one camera body that can do photos and videos on a super high level is really valuable to me. Now, the speed of the Sony A1 is quite excessive. There was a clothing brand for kids that approached me about doing a photo shoot. Kids are the way they are. Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they don't cooperate. When you need the right exact moment, those 30 frames per second have really come through for me. The Sony A1 has both electronic and mechanical shutter. According to the numbers, there is about 0.2 stops of dynamic range difference between the electronic shutter and using the mechanical shutter. To be honest, I don't see a big difference. The electronic viewfinder on the A1 is absolutely amazing. I notice the resolution goes down when I half press, when I'm focusing, when I'm tracking. The camera probably needs to prioritize the processors to autofocus, so it kind of drops the resolution roughly half the amount, I think. And the maximum resolution, it does 60 frames per second refresh rate, which is fine. I think it's really smooth. For photos, I don't hesitate shooting it in crop mode. When you need a little more reach, I personally prefer to crop in the moment as opposed to crop in post. The composition is a little different if I crop in. First off, it's a really exceptional, amazing 8K video. It's beautiful. It does have a line skipped 4K 50 or 60 frames per second video in full frame mode. Same thing in 100 or 120 frames per second, but you can crop in on the 4K 50, 60 frames per second video on the A1. That's pixel to pixel. You can have some moire effects when you have line skipped. For now, let's move on. 35mm 1.4 GM. I've practically not taken this lens off the camera body since I got it. I used to have a Sigma 35mm 1.2 Art, which is also a brilliant lens, but it's a gigantic lens. So that was the predominant reason why I sold the Sigma. The Sigma did not have any focus breathing at all. The Sony does have a significant amount of focus breathing. Depending on the camera body, there is focus breathing compensation. The Sony A1 does, but only in 4K 50 or 60p mode. I have two Sony A1 bodies. I'm shooting this on the Sony A1 and I'm shooting this on a 50mm 1.2 GM. Probably my favorite lens camera combination. One of the first shoots that I did with this ended up on a huge billboard I was approached by a photographer who was doing a jewelry shoot, and the jewelry shoot was meant to be a photo and video same time, and the photographer was not comfortable doing video. I had nothing to do with the art direction, telling the models what to do, choosing the models, the styling and all of that. All I had to do was just shoot video. And that video ended up on Times Square. To see the client use the video in peak season during Christmas made me very, very happy. What also made me very happy was deciding to buy the 1.2 GM because it practically has no chromatic aberration wide open. It does have its flaws. It's a relatively big lens. It has significant focus breathing. To be honest, focus breathing is usually not a problem. This is more of an issue with the 35mm. The focus breathing is more apparent in the 35mm. Now, just as I was about to talk about the third camera and my camera bag, the Sony A1 overheated. Unfortunately, in 8K video, it does overheat in about 40 minutes. I don't have any AC on here. I live in Phuket, Thailand, so it's relatively warm and humid environment. It does that only in 8K and 100 or 120 frames per second 4K video. If you set the camera to 4K 50, 60, it doesn't overheat. I've done a whole 2-hour podcast with the camera plugged in and it did not overheat. I honestly feel the Sony A7 IV is probably the best value proposition across the board. I believe the Sony A7 IV scores about the best in terms of dynamic range. It has better dynamic range than FX3, FX6, FX9. Dynamic range is not everything, and in this case it's marginal. And I think the biggest reason why it performs so well in 4K video, it reads out the whole sensor and it distills that 7K image into a 4K image, which kind of hides probably a lot of the noise and is one of the reasons why it's so clean. But the one caveat about that is it has a little bit of rolling shutter. That's the sacrifice that you have to make. So if you're looking to get into the Sony ecosystem, the Sony A7 IV is absolutely an amazing camera. But in 2025, I think that camera will be replaced sometime this year. Let's talk about the lens, the 70-200. This is one of the main staple lenses for photographers across the board. The one thing that I really enjoyed about this compared to the predecessor is how well it does in close-up. It has almost macro ability. The model is maybe changing. As that's happening, I'm doing product shots and I don't have to change the lens. And for me, that saves time, and for me, that gives my client more value for their money. It's almost a perfect lens, almost to a fault. It's clinically sharp all throughout the range. It's really light. It's an absolutely brilliant lens, and I'm not planning to sell it anytime soon. What I use predominantly for audio, DJI Mic 2 double set. It comes in this really nice case, and it has like everything tucked really neatly into it. I've never had problems with battery, internal memory or anything. It's brilliant. What I really truly enjoy about this is the ability to use the hot shoe. There's like a small adapter that you can put on the receiver of the set. This gives me the ability to not have to worry about the cables, like if they get knocked out of place or if they're not fully connected. This is like super stable, and most of the time I don't have to use the 32-bit float internal recordings from the microphone set. It's really nice to have it. It's effectively a raw audio format, but like with this hot shoe and with the levels set correctly in the camera, I've very seldomly had to use the internal recording. I also have, just in case, white version. Sometimes, people are wearing light clothing. It comes in this really nice bag or thingy. Right out of the gate, it's not set to 32-bit float. You can't change it. You have to connect the receiver with the microphone, and through the menu system on there, you have to set it to 32-bit float to really unlock the full potential of this mic. So I think it's a little bit of an oversight of DJI, like kind of locking people out that way and maybe forcing some people to get the receiver set with it. Also in this, the lavalier mics. I think it's well worth it to get those microphones. There's a little tiny notch where you can kind of tuck the cable into. That does really give you peace of mind, because sometimes people yank on the microphone unintentionally, and for whatever reason, sometimes you're left with no audio. It's not happened to me, but that could happen. So this is a nice solution from DJI, and it probably means that the SAT is a little bit more compact because they didn't have to put the locking mechanism into the top of the microphone. So the first smart hot shoe microphone I got, Sony B1M. And this is a really, really good tool for directional audio. You can't have stereo with this. I mean, it's just directional, but it's really, really good at that, and you never have to worry about batteries. This is powered through the hot shoe, and it's never failed me. On that note, I also have another smart hot shoe microphone, the Sony M1. I have it currently at directional because I was kind of comparing the directional mode in both of those, and like this guy performed hands down much, much better. I think it's really important to have like a good stereo microphone. Maybe you're taking in a scene and you want it to be a little bit more immersing. Another smart feature that this microphone has that this guy does not have, that is, you can record up to 4 channels of audio with the M1. We're almost at the end of my camera bag. Now, for a hybrid shooter, especially for a video shooter, there's one thing that is really, really important to have, and that is ND filters. Nisi, they make lenses. The quality of these, the color accuracy, they're really, really good. This is the Insta360 Go 3S. It has like this tilty screen. You can detach the pod, and it is magnetic, so you can mount it on different things. It's 8-bit video. It's not like super good quality video, but it's quite decent. The weakness of this camera is probably low light. I think GoPro and some of the other brands, DJI action cameras, etc., they do a little bit better in low light, but none of them are this compact. I got this mainly just to get some street photography shots. Last but not least, batteries. 11 of those batteries. Battery issues should never be the issue. The battery lasts way longer in my A7 IV compared to the A1. It's probably like, the processing unit in it just runs through the batteries significantly quicker. This is everything that I have in my bag at the moment. Maybe I'll go into my extras in another video, but anyway, I hope you found some of this informative. I hope you liked the content. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Take care and have a good day.